Hello everyone and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. Last week, my husband and I had to make a ridiculously long 17-hour road trip to North Carolina for a wedding. Between the driving, family dinners, and the endless catching up with relatives, we were beat. We booked a room in a modest motel for the whole week. Nothing fancy, but it did the job. By the time the wedding day arrived, we were already on autopilot. That morning was pure chaos. We were both rushing to get ready, barely sticking to the schedule. My husband got dressed first and headed out to run some last-minute errands before we left for the venue. So I had the motel room to myself while I got ready. It was one of those absurdly hot and humid mornings, and since I didn't want to soak my dress in sweat while I did my hair and makeup, I decided to get ready in my underwear for the moment. The sink and mirror in that motel weren't in the bathroom. They were out in the open, right across from the bed. The curtains were drawn, but they were thin, the kind that give you privacy, but don't make you totally invisible. If someone really tried looking in from outside, they could probably make out a shadow or silhouette. There I was, curling my hair in front of the mirror, trying to look halfway alive after a brutal week, when I caught a glimpse of someone passing in front of the window. Nothing unusual. I thought it might be my husband coming back early and peeking to see if I was ready yet. But then the guy stopped. And he didn't just stop. He started leaning in, trying to look between the curtains like he was searching for something or someone. At first, I still thought it could be my husband playing a joke or something, but then it hit me. No, impossible. If it were him, he wouldn't be lurking by the window. He'd walk right in. That's when it got truly terrifying. This man, who I now knew was definitely not my husband, didn't just hang around outside. He walked straight to the door, and before I could react, he opened it and stepped inside. Yes, he literally opened the door and entered the room like it was his. Turns out when my husband left earlier, he must have forgotten to pull the door all the way closed, so it never latched. He felt awful about it later. But in that moment, I was just staring at this tall stranger, easily over 6 feet, who had just walked into my room while I was in nothing but my underwear, with a curling iron in my hand. My whole body froze for a second. My brain switched into survival mode, like, is this how it ends? Do I fight, run, scream? The guy just stood there, looking at me like I was on the menu. He had this wide, disgusting smile that gave me chills, and he started mumbling something in a low, slurred voice. I couldn't make out most of it, but I heard "pretty lady" and "come here," and that was enough. I don't know what flipped the switch, but I went from frozen to blazing with fury. I confronted him with the curling iron still hot, screaming, "Get out!" at the top of my lungs. I must have caught him off guard because he stumbled backward, out onto the motel walkway again. I didn't wait. I lunged for the door and slammed it, throwing the deadbolt before he could even think of trying again. I collapsed right there on the floor in front of the door. I couldn't even cry in that instant. I just sat in shock until my husband came back. About 15 minutes later, I told him everything, and he was furious. He wanted to go out and look for the guy, but I begged him to stay with me. I couldn't be alone, not for a second. We reported everything to the motel front desk, and they called the police. I gave a full description of the man, but after checking with the other guests, they said no one matching him was staying there. He was just some random guy, a creep who had wandered in off the street. Needless to say, we skipped almost the entire wedding reception and left town a day early. What was supposed to be a joyful weekend turned into something we wanted to escape as fast as possible. And let me tell you, now I check the locks 2 and 3 times because a single moment of forgetfulness is all it takes for someone with the worst intentions to walk right through your door like it's nothing. Story 2. This is a family classic. One of those stories my parents would pull out now and then to remind us how tough life was back in the day. It happened in 1984, long before I could remember anything. but I've heard it so many times that it feels like one of those odd, old memories that sneak into your head even if you weren't really there. At the time, my folks were having a really rough go. 4 kids, no savings, and barely enough income to survive. So we all ended up living in a pay-by-the-week motel. Honestly, there was nothing glamorous about it, but we managed for about a year while my dad busted his back working, and my mom stayed home dealing with 3 of us under 4 years old. One morning, Dad was getting ready for work and Mom was helping my older sister get dressed for school when all of a sudden she froze. She saw a shadow right outside the window. Someone there standing still as a statue. My mom isn't exactly the brave one in this tale, so she panicked and hustled everyone into the bathroom, whispering desperately to my dad that there was someone outside. At first, he brushed it off with a, "It's probably nothing." But when he peeked out the front door, he saw the guy too. Without making a sound, he moved toward the doorway, flung it open, and just like that, the man bolted, running like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. My dad figured that if the guy were truly dangerous, he would have tried something instead of fleeing. So he told Mom to keep the curtain closed and not to open the door for anyone while he was at work. She didn't like the idea of him leaving one bit, but there were bills to pay, so he headed out with my sister. A few hours later, apparently I was being the loudest baby on the planet, screaming for no clear reason, and Mom was doing her best to calm me on the couch while the other kids watched Sesame Street. For some reason, she looked back toward the window, and yep, the guy had returned. This time he was planted there, giving off a creepy vibe, trying to peer through the gap in the curtain. She didn't stick around to find out more. She grabbed me, still wailing of course, pushed my brother and sister toward the bathroom, locked the door, and called my dad in full-on panic mode. He dropped everything and rushed home without a second thought. And what does he find when he gets there? The man was still outside the window, hands cupped around his eyes like a textbook voyeur. My dad didn't hesitate. No warnings, no preliminary shouting. He charged him and landed a punch right to the temple. The guy stumbled, completely dazed, and Dad let it all out, yelling at him, shaking him, and firing off questions like, "Do you think it's funny to terrorize a woman and her children? You want to mess with my family?" He probably would have kept going if the motel manager hadn't shown up, thinking the troublemaker was my dad. In the middle of the chaos, the creep managed to slip away, but he never came back. And honestly, that was a smart decision on his part. Story 3. I have to tell you about one of the most unsettling nights of my childhood. And believe me, I had a few weird ones, but this one stuck with me. I was about 10 or 11 years old when my mom got a job managing a small, old-school motel on the outskirts of our town. It wasn't glamorous or anything like that, but the job came with housing, so we packed up our things and moved in. The place was rough when we arrived, damaged walls, strange smells, and apparently the last guy who lived there had some shady business going on. I found out later that his wife was running a meth operation out of the place, while he just existed as a greasy background zombie. After a few months, we had it decent enough to live in. By then, Mom was full-time at the front desk, and since the check-in area was basically part of our living room, we could hear or see almost everything that happened at night. The weirdest part was that people would wander in through the office door like it was nothing. Strangers poking their heads in while I was in the middle of a final boss fight in a video game became normal. Many were former customers, or more unsettling still, people still looking for Steve, the meth guy. Fast forward about a year. It was summer break, and I decided to pull an all-nighter playing Skyrim. I had my little blanket fort set up in the living room and was completely immersed in the game when I started hearing voices. At first, it was just chatter coming from outside. It sounded like 2 men speaking in a language I didn't recognize. No big deal. I assumed they were guests who might have been left a key or something, but then the tone changed. They didn't leave. They started pulling on the door. At first it was gentle, like they were checking if it was unlocked. Then it got stronger and louder until they ended up pounding on it like they meant business. Our house had a strange layout, and my parents' bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. I realized right away that they probably weren't hearing any of this. While I froze in place, the pounding finally stopped. But then I heard some tapping on the window right behind the reception desk. And sure enough, I could see the shadow of a man moving behind the curtain, trying to get a better view. That's when I noticed another figure moving near the kitchen screen door. That's when I went into full panic mode, thinking these guys were trying to get in at multiple points at once. Instead of shouting, which would have been reasonable, I decided to be sneaky and crawled on my belly to the little office area. There was a key drop slot in the wall, just a small flap that people used to leave their keys when checking out. I grabbed a pencil, lifted the flap a bit, and took a peek through the slit, and that's when I saw two more men standing there with their hands shoved in their pockets, staring at the house like they were waiting for something. I slammed it shut and nearly burst into tears. Right then I saw the hallway light switch on, and my parents came out half asleep and scared. As soon as my dad flipped on the kitchen light and shouted, "What the hell is going on?" all the noise outside stopped immediately. The guys took off running like they'd been caught red-handed, and one of them yelled something as they disappeared into the night. I managed to explain everything through sobs, and we ended up calling the police. They arrived super late and didn't do much. They just said it was probably some workers who hadn't realized the motel was closed. That explanation never convinced me. They didn't act like lost travelers or confused tourists. They behaved like people who were desperate to get in. And even today, I don't know what they would have done if they'd actually managed to get inside that night. Story 4. The other day I was talking to my mom, and we ended up remembering this weird, murky situation my brother went through years ago. I must have been around 8, and we were living in a rural part of Colorado, literally in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place that makes you ask, why did we move here? After putting up with brutal winters and the oddities of a tiny town, my older brother had enough. He got his GED, packed up his beat-up Saab, and decided to head back west to live with a friend. He left his ferrets with us because apparently those little critters are banned in California, and hit the road, thinking he was finally escaping the madness. Well, the Rockies had other plans. Not even 5 hours into the trip, the car broke down while he was crossing the mountains. He ended up stranded in a tiny town after nightfall, and a local tow truck driver came to the rescue. The guy offered to take him to a motel for the night, but instead of stopping at a chain place, he drove right past it and said, "No, I wouldn't even let my dog sleep there. There's a much better spot up ahead." In theory, that sounded good, right? Except that this nicer place turned out to be a rundown motel that had clearly seen better decades. My brother isn't the complaining type. He's quiet, skinny, and avoids conflict at all costs. So he thanked the guy and went along with it. At night, the place didn't look so terrible, but when we arrived the next day to pick him up, everything seemed off. There was a dry, cracked swimming pool right in the middle of the parking lot, like someone had abandoned the idea of building a resort halfway through. And then there was the family running the place, sitting in folding chairs, staring toward the rooms as if they were watching a play. No phones, no books, just watching all day. When we went into my brother's room, it got even stranger. The bathroom had a little window right next to the toilet, barely a couple of feet off the ground, and with nothing covering it. So if someone walked by while you were doing your business, congratulations, free show. The room itself looked neglected and a bit depressing. My brother pulled us aside and in a very low voice told us he hadn't slept a wink all night because something felt seriously wrong. He explained that there was a connecting door that linked his room to the one next door, like the ones some hotels use for big families. He said he heard soft little noises on the other side, so he cracked his door open just a bit to peek. And what he saw froze him. There was a person standing completely still on the other side of the second door, just standing there, not moving, not speaking. A human shadow waiting. He shut his door and locked it immediately, thinking maybe he was being paranoid. But a few hours later, he woke up to the sound of someone carefully jiggling the doorknob, trying to open it. The guy was really trying to get into his room. The sound lasted a minute or two and then stopped completely. My brother stayed rooted in place, too scared to even breathe loudly, and spent the rest of the night lying there, listening for any other noise. The next morning, he told us everything in whispers, like the walls had ears. He never saw the guy's face, but he had a gut feeling he'd been watched the whole time, probably from the moment he checked in. Between that, the town's incredibly weird vibe, the unsettling Motel family, and the fact that the mechanic's shop was sketchy as can be, everything felt wrong. In the end, we left the car because the repair cost more than it was worth. Honestly, my brother felt relieved. He was more than happy to leave that sinister town behind and go back home. Story 5. This happened when I was about 14, in the middle of a strange transitional stage in my life. I was an awkward, visibly trans person, still in the process of figuring myself out. And I was on a road trip with my stepmother and 3 of my siblings. We were staying at a budget motel somewhere in a small tourist town, just a technical stop on our way to Atlanta. The whole place felt like the kind of motel you only stay at if you're desperate or if your car broke down 3 miles away. One night, my stepmom and I were hanging out on the stairs in front of our room while the kids stayed inside. That's when a man approached. He was one of those overly friendly types who clearly don't understand boundaries. Apparently, he recognized my stepmom from a bar downtown and, unprompted, showed up with a beer for her and a box of cheap popsicles for the kids. I didn't get a good feeling about him, but I was also like a little gremlin when it came to food, so I started eating them while I chatted with my stepmom. The guy wouldn't stop looking at me in a way that made my skin crawl. It was like he could tell I was trying to figure myself out, sizing me up, staring too long at my chest and my crotch, like he was doing mental calculations. At first I downplayed it, but I should have trusted my instincts. Shortly after that, I started feeling really dizzy. I went back to the room alone and secured the lock behind me. My head was spinning, and I spent the next hour sitting on the bathroom floor, dry heaving while the room tilted around me. All the kids were sound asleep, and I didn't want to wake them. Then around 3 a.m., I got a text from my stepmom asking me to slide the deadbolt open. I did, and there they were, her and him. He smiled at me with a strange gleam in his eyes, still looking at me like I was some kind of puzzle he couldn't quite solve. After they came in, she said goodnight to him like it was nothing, then lay down next to my brother and immediately fell asleep, like someone had flipped her switch. I made sure the door was locked again, double-checked the people, and tried to stay calm, but something just wasn't right. A little later, I started to hear a scraping noise right outside the door, like something being dragged across the concrete. When I took a look, there he was. The guy had come back, and he wasn't just lurking. He was reaching for the doorknob. I panicked, but silently. I grabbed the small knife I always kept in my gym bag and my pepper spray, and crouched next to the door, trying not to fall apart. I tried to wake my stepmom, but she was completely unconscious in an unnatural way. Then, of course, I vomited. Everything inside me flipped from fear, nausea, the leftover popsicles. Whatever was in me was coming out. And while I was dry heaving again, the guy started seriously wrestling with the door, like he thought it would give at any moment. Finally, the noise stopped, and I carefully looked through the peephole again. He was standing there staring straight at it, smiling. He raised his hand and made that disturbing gesture where you drag your thumb along your throat. Then he ran his gross finger through the whole motion, like he was trying to be both threatening and creepy. After that, he turned around and walked away slowly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the peephole the entire time. I was still frozen when I heard a loud thud behind me, and I swear I almost had a heart attack, thinking he'd somehow managed to get in. But no, it was just my brother, who had fallen out of bed in his sleep and hit the floor like a sack of potatoes. I helped him back into bed, cleaned up the earlier mess, and spent the rest of the night sitting upright, my gaze darting to the door every few seconds. When morning finally came, I told my stepmom everything. She didn't remember a single thing from the night before, not the guy, the drinks, not even asking me to open the door. Honestly, I think that guy drugged her, and me too. I was just lucky I didn't pass out the way she did, and maybe that's the only reason nothing worse happened.